Stories from the Idiot Box, where we explore the good, the bad, and the wacky in television. Today, I'm Allison Lips. I'm always Allison Lips, but today, Adam Nedeff is joining us, and we are talking about the wacky in television with Chuck Barris and Gong. This book is Adam's book on the notorious Gong Show host, who may or may not be a CIA assassin. How are you, Adam?
I'm a box of fluffy ducks. How are you?
Trying to figure out what that means. I'm good.
I'm glad to be back here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for coming. So, Chuck Barris fascinates me. Obviously, you had an interest in him, otherwise, you wouldn't have written a 300-page book about him. 350-ish? Yeah, 350-ish page book. Um, why Chuck Barris? I know we've spoken about Bill Cullen. I have Alan Ludden, and I have Gene Rayburn up there. There's also the Monty Hall book, Dennis James, and a bunch of others that are on my
Oh yeah,
to
yeah,
buy
but
list.
I mean you've got the essentials there, so thank you very much for that. No, the reason for Chuck Barris, I think, the interest there is just because for most of Chuck Barris's life, what we knew about him was what he wanted us to know. He released
Yeah.
multiple memoirs, and the most famous one was one that was definitely a bit shrouded in mystery. It was rooted around this claim of him being in the CIA,
Right,
and
which
nobody
is
could wrap
not
their heads
true.
around if it was true or they wanted to believe it was true. But really, Chuck only let people in on what he wanted them to know about him.
Yeah.
And now that Chuck is gone, that was really all we were left with, and I wanted a more three-dimensional view of the man. So it was a chance for me to talk to his employees, talk to people who had crossed paths with him, ex
hmm
contestants, and figure out who Chuck was and what made him tick, and what it was like to work for him, and what it was like to be a part of this empire that was really, really a successful business for 14 years. And then
Yes,
Chuck just kind of hit the off switch on it and walked away. So that was the point of the Chuck Barris story, and pursuing that was figuring out who he was after all these years of just having one view of it.
that is. I I don't remember it off the top of my head, but was it known why Chuck Barris was like, I am done with this? Because he had the Gong Show, which is probably the most famous outside of the Newlywed Game, which Bob Eubanks, everyone
Um,
kind of
well, the
knows.
reason,
Yep.
yeah, the reason Chuck walked away, I think he kind of reached his ceiling of stress in 1980. There were a couple of factors going on. Number one, just fame sort of exhausted him.
Right, he did not
You
want
have
to
to
leave the
remember, as
spotlight.
successful as Chuck's company was, he could walk down the street undetected right up until the day that the Gong Show premiered. And that was when he made himself an
Yeah.
on camera talent, and his life changed pretty drastically, and not necessarily for the better. So I think 4 years of fame was enough for Chuck, but also he had some issues going on with his daughter, and in 1979, he introduced a new show called Three's a Crowd. And Three's a Crowd was an attempt from Chuck to push the envelope even further. You mentioned the Newlywed Game, and Chuck introduces the show in 1979 called Three's a Crowd,
Yeah,
which is the Newlywed Game, except instead of being played by a married couple, it's played by three people. It's played by the husband, the wife, and the husband's secretary. And the object of the game was to see if the wife or the secretary matched more answers with the husband.
if you thought
And the
the
backlash,
Newlywed Game ended in divorce,
yeah,
wait until
the
you see this
backlash to
show.
this show was incredible because this was after there had been a lot of push for equality in the workplace. And now here's a show that just kind of openly celebrates the fact that bosses sleep with their secretaries. And the whole point of the show was they were very openly acknowledging that the bosses were doing that and cheating on their wives, and the questions were even written and skewed to assume that there was an affair happening.
I don't remember
So
that part, but I was also like 8 watching the show.
oh yeah. So there was a lot of backlash there, and not just it would have been one thing if Three's a Crowd was a bomb and if people hated Three's a Crowd. But what the ratings data was showing was it was actually bringing down the rest of Chuck's shows. The other shows that Chuck had on the air started losing viewership as Three's a Crowd remained on the air. People hated it that much. So by 1980, Chuck pretty much just had to shut the whole company down.
What were the other shows on the air at that time? There are a
At that,
ton of questionable Chuck
yeah,
Barris productions.
at that point, he had the dating game, the Newlywed Game, the $1.98 Beauty Show, um, and the Gong Show.
So the serial
Um,
killer on the dating game was not what killed this empire.
no, 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 no. Um,
Of
but
all things.
Chuck was definitely looking to expand the empire going into the 1979-1980 season. There was even a trade ad touting the stuff that Chuck was going to premiere the following year. He had a show called Dollar a Second in development. He was going to try to get a talk show starring himself on the air in the 1980 season, and all of that just got shut down completely because Chuck just hit his boiling point in 1980 and had to get away from everything.
I'm trying to imagine what a Chuck Barris talk show would look like. I'm not
There were a
sure.
lot of ideas. There were a lot of ideas floating around, and at one point, Chuck told his staff that the idea was he would be lying in bed for the entire show, which I think it may have been a quirky idea. I think armchair psychiatrist, it may point to how exhausted he was at that point that he just liked the idea that he could stay in bed and host an hour-long show without having to do anything.
Well, Joan Rivers had her online show where she just interviews celebrities from bed.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Chuck was ahead of his time. That's what people always
Yeah,
say.
exactly. I think he was ahead of his time in a lot of things, but also a sign of the times
Absolutely.
in many ways. Dating game questions. The
Oh
Gong
yeah.
Show is one of those shows where they've tried to bring it back with um, Mike Myers as the
Yeah.
host. I forget what his character's name was.
Yeah.
He called everyone cheeky
Yeah.
monkeys, and it didn't
Yeah.
really work.
They've attempted to bring the Gong Show back a few times, and
At
the
least
ironic
three.
fate of Chuck Barris was at the time he was considered ahead of his time, and now his ideas blend in. So everything that
Yes.
made his game shows unique in the 1960s and 1970s is stuff that's completely normal in the TV landscape now. So the Gong Show
Yes.
doesn't stand out the way that it did back in 1976.
No. And after watching the first season of America's Got Talent, I'm like, this is basically the Gong Show.
Yeah,
Right down
it
to
is,
the
and
three buzzers, which, okay, I buzz you out instead of a gong.
yeah, that's basically a
Okay,
gong, and also
same thing.
it's the first few weeks of American Idol, the audition weeks. I mean, they
Yes.
don't just show you the great acts that they want to keep bringing back week after week. It's all about, oh my God, these people are terrible performers. Um,
Yeah.
and to be honest, when American Idol was at its peak, I tuned out once they actually got to the stage. I
I
only
think a
wanted to see
lot
the
of
auditions.
us did.
Yeah,
I was watching an interview Chuck did with Conan O'Brien in 2002 or 2003 that was posted to YouTube. And Chuck mentions that American Idol is essentially the Gong Show in many ways in terms of people coming on, being bad, and everyone's entertained. And Chuck argues that they're not the same because on the Gong Show, no one thought they were any good.
yeah,
Whereas on America's Got Talent, not America's Got Talent, American Idol, you can see people who genuinely think they are good. Their friends and family are like, "You are excellent," and then they open their mouth, and you're like,
yeah.
"Oh, someone should have just
Well,
helped."
that's, and there were acts that were aspiring to become big stars from the Gong Show and uh, came on stage, and the staff talked about that. They said, they were amazed by the people that would come in for auditions who were just absolutely tone deaf and didn't seem to know it. And they said,
Yeah.
this was where the criticism of the Gong Show came in, is you're parading these people out to be humiliated. And from the staff's perspective, what they found morbidly fascinating about it was these people told their family and friends, I'm going to sing on national television, and they got that far without anybody who cared about them sitting them down and saying, listen, you're not cut out for this. There was just that was the way the staff saw it, was these were people who did not have anyone in their lives who were willing to be honest with them, so they were caught by surprise when the gong hit. for them.
So there were a
Um,
few people who were like, but
there
it's
were a
also,
few
have
people,
you seen
absolutely.
this show before?
Yeah, yeah.
JP Morgan
It's
is flashing people. The Popsicle Twins were last week, and they have no discernible skill.
But that's the thing is what one of those things that you have to explain to youngins now. And I'm only 42 years old, but I mean we've seen so much change in the entertainment landscape that it's to the point that you need to contextualize what the Gong Show was. In 1976, entertainment had gatekeepers. Everything that you need to
Yes.
become a star now is in your pocket. Your phone has everything you need to launch your career in show business. Whereas back then, there were three avenues to get yourself seen in front of a large audience, and it was all closed off. There were ladders that you had to climb to get to any of those three avenues: CBS, ABC, and
Yes.
NBC. Um, so it was a long, long journey to get yourself seen, and then along comes this show, The Gong Show, which was pretty much as close as you could get to YouTube or TikTok in 1976.
Right.
Here you go. Here's somebody for 90 seconds who's going to do something that gets your attention. Whisk them off stage. All right, let's bring on the next person. They're going to be out here for 90 seconds trying to get your attention. And so it was 1976, social media almost, The Gong Show. And that was the only avenue that existed for anybody who was trying to be seen at that point. So that was kind of the Gong Show's contribution to the world. Was it was a way for people to get
Yeah.
past the gate and people to get access quickly if they wanted to achieve something like that.
Let's back up a bit because I have read some of this, and you brought up, you actually start with
Yeah.
Major Beau's comedy hour,
Major
and
Beau's original amateur
original,
hour. Yeah.
yes,
Which was the Gong Show. And that's the funny thing about
yeah, like
Chuck Barris has
literally
this
the Gong
legacy
Show
for
down to
being
the Gong.
yeah, Chuck Barris has this legacy for being an innovator, and what's strange about it is pretty much all of his most successful ideas were other people's ideas.
Yes.
And the Gong Show was originally a radio show in the 1930s called Major Beau's Original Amateur Hour. The host was a guy named Major Bowes, who was this crotchety old businessman who
Hmm.
sat next to a gong. And so he would bring on the acts one at a time, and if Major Bowes didn't like the act,
Yeah.
he would bang the gong and whisk them off stage and bring on the next act. And uh, what gradually came out about the show was it was a bit of a farce in the sense that somebody got a rundown sheet and saw the
Yeah.
timings of each of the acts, and they figured out from the time allotted for each of the acts that they decided in advance who the major would gong. So it wasn't a full blown legitimate talent
Right.
competition, although the way they determined the winner was they encouraged people to call the show or send telegrams voting for the acts, and that was how they picked the winner. So that aspect of it was legit. And Major Beau's Amateur Hour did launch stars. Frank Sinatra was a contestant on Major
Yes.
Beau's original Amateur Hour. And at one point, Major Beau's introduced traveling caravans of winners.
Hmm.
Um, it would be a group of people who had been contestants on the show going on tour, um, and
Sound
they would just
familiar?
circle the country. Yeah, they would circle the country performing their acts in front of paying audiences.
Hmm. So even the Gong Show came from someplace else,
Even the
but
Gong
it's
Show was a used idea, yeah. And in fact, Jamie Farr, when I asked Jamie Farr how he first learned about the Gong Show, Jamie Farr had seen the title at a television convention. And as soon as he saw the title, he figured out what the show was because he had listened to Major Bowes as a kid. So, I mean, he immediately figured out this was a knockoff just from seeing the title.
oh yes, Jamie Farr, one of the regulars.
One of the regulars, I was surprised to learn from talking to him, he didn't even have a contract. They just asked him to be on the show that much. And just he had a fantastic relationship with the staff. His family ended up having a fantastic relationship with Chuck's folks. Chuck's uh, the set of the Gong Show had two dolls hanging from it after a time, and it was two dolls that Jamie's wife had given Chuck as gifts, and Chuck was so taken with the gifts that he just added them to the set.
Oh wow, that's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
yeah.
Um, and I don't think it was in your book, but just trying to find clips on YouTube, I was surprised by some of the people who were on the Gong Show as panelists who could gong people, not necessarily in terms of contestants, because we knew um, Paul Rubens was on. There's a few people who did go on to have real careers,
Yeah,
but in terms of the panel, like David Letterman was on for a week, which I'm a Letterman fan. I
he's
knew that. I haven't seen
I'm a
those
Letterman
episodes.
fan, and he sticks out when he's on the panel of the show because
Yeah.
it's it's the wrong vibe for him, and you can kind of sense that. Like you can tell he doesn't feel like he fits in there.
It's not his type of irony.
Right. Yeah, he has a very specific brand of humor, and the Gong Show didn't fit completely for him.
No, and I found a clip, or I was reading something, and apparently Soupy Sales was on it, and I'm just like,
Soupy Sales was on a few times. Yeah, the ham
how?
that made West Virginia famous.
Okay, you're gonna need to explain that to me.
So that was just a nickname that they introduced him with on What's My Line once, and it always stuck with him because I grew up in West Virginia,
But I
and
don't think he's from West Virginia.
he was born in North Carolina. He moved to West Virginia when he was a kid, and West
Okay,
Virginia was always the area that he referred to as home.
okay,
And in fact, I went to Marshall University and I majored in radio and television, which is part of the journalism school.
yes.
And if you go in the journalism library, they have this wall of noteworthy alums. And it's a bunch of people who went on to work in the newspaper business and a bunch of people who went on to work in television news and radio news. So it's a bunch of very distinguished men with their arms folded and looking serious and
I
the
mean,
hand on the
Soupy.
chin. And then there's one photo at the end of Soupy Sales with this big, dopey, open mouth grin at the camera. And yeah, that was Soupy Sales, the guy who somehow parlayed his journalism degree at Marshall into a career throwing pies. That's the kind of legacy that I wanted to have. So that's why I majored in that at Marshall University.
There you go. I don't know what it says about me when I read that, and I'm like, wait, I thought Soupy Sales was above the Gong Show.
You know, he was there for the beginning. He was one of the ones. If you watch the Gong Show, you'll see the usual suspects um,
Yeah.
appearing as panelists on the Gong Show. So you'll see like Soupy Sales and Fannie Flagg and Joyce Bulifant. And what happens is after the first few weeks, you start seeing the typical game show panelists of the 1970s disappearing. And suddenly it just becomes the Gong Show judges are anybody who would answer their phone for the show. Um, one of the people that I interviewed for the book was Joanne Worley,
Oh,
and
yes.
I suspect that Joanne's experience was very, very similar to the other game show regulars, and explains why you saw the panel change shape like that early on. Joanne said, it was fun in the beginning because nobody really knew what the show was, and it was kind of fun seeing these quirky acts. But when the Gong Show started to get popular, people started seeing it as an avenue to become famous. And she said there were
Ah,
people who were really trying their heart out, and the audience was booing them. And she said there were moments when it stopped being fun. And she said eventually she did ask her agent, you know what, stop taking bookings for me on this show. And I think that probably happened with a lot of panelists where they took the gig because, yeah, I've done Match Game, I've done Hollywood Squares, I'll do this new show. And they do this new show, The Gong Show, and once they realized what it was, ooh, I don't know if I want to do that again. So very gradually, every one of them backed away from it.
got it. That explains. I mean, the people who did well on it are a very specific type of people. And I
Yeah.
remember Joanne being on, Worley being on it frequently.
Hmm.
And of course, watching it on Game Show Network, I didn't know the chronological order I was watching things
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
So it could be one like beginning episode, one newer episode,
Yeah.
and I don't
It,
realize that they faded out over time because I've never sat
right.
down and looked
Yeah.
at the list of episodes.
Well, I was crazy enough to do that, so there.
You
I,
did it, so I don't have to. So Is there anything about the Gong Show that, like, maybe we wouldn't know or we should know? Because it seems like it's just an odd beast. I remember some of his other shows more clearly, probably because they didn't end up morphing into modern television shows. Like, we don't have the Newlywed Game these days.
We kind of don't, but we do have that kind of that freedom for couples to discuss what's going on in their private lives in front of the entire world. There are any number of podcasts or daytime talk
Maury,
shows that have made the most of that. Oh yeah. Um,
I guess
so
Maury would have been
if
the
it's not exactly a game show, if it's not exactly the same DNA, you can at least see some sort of aspect of these past shows that has
yeah,
bled into it. The Gong
listening
Show
to,
is the most obvious because the shows like American Idol or America's Got Talent are obvious. But if you're talking about the willingness for people to, flirt with strangers in front of the camera, that's the dating game, and now we've had a slew of dating shows like that. Um, so
yes,
that's what's important about Chuck Barris is for better or worse. And even Chuck conceded that it may have leaned towards worse. He gave some
yes.
interviews later in life where he expressed that maybe he regretted the shows that he created a little bit. Um, but for better or worse, Chuck did shape what television became and what entertainment at large became.
For a guy who created all of these shows, he did show some remorse for it towards
Yeah,
the end of his life, rather than just being like, "Yeah, I'm that guy." It's like, "Oh yeah, I sorry
yeah.
guys, I ruined television."
Yeah, um, and that's I'm sure at the time he didn't recognize what he was doing. I am sure that he really
Yeah.
just thought these were great ideas for shows and they'd be hits. And it's just one of those things with the benefit of hindsight where he looked at television and thought, boy, I'm not sure I did such a good thing. And that's when you have enough money that you can just retreat to a little tiny town in France and just do whatever you want for the rest of your life. I'm sure it's hard to reconcile the way you feel about the fact that you have this incredibly cushy life, but
Mm,
also you're not sure whether you've done good or bad with what you accomplished.
that is
That's got to be a difficult way to live.
that's true. And his
Yeah,
legacy is he created all these shows that aged badly, but also had an incredible impact on television that there's really no way to reverse that once the
yeah,
cat got out of the bag.
yeah. Um, I mean, I still enjoy the Gong Show quite a bit, and I definitely enjoy
Yes.
one of his other creations, the New Treasure Hunt. I love
Oh
those shows and I
yes, Jeff
appreciate them for what they
Edwards.
are. Yeah, and
That was probably
I
the
definitely
only show that didn't have an element of cruelness in it to the extent of the others, because it was very similar to Let's Make a Deal in the you can
it
take
was
that.
It was Chuck Barris's version of Let's Make a Deal, and even then, people did use the word cruel to describe Treasure Hunt. For the people that never saw Treasure Hunt, the gist of um, it was let's make a deal, but when you get to the point where it's time to reveal what's inside the box, they would have a slow-moving, long, drawn-out comedy sketch. And the whole
Yeah.
purpose of the comedy sketch was to completely delay opening the box. So the contestant is just going through hell, agonizing over what she's won while they're acting out this comedy skit around her that's just delaying finding out what her prize is. Um, it's very, very strange and a very, very funny show once you get into it and once you wrap your head around what they're doing.
Yes.
But yeah, it was absolutely regarded. I actually have a magazine article from the period with Jeff Edwards, and the article calls him the cruelest quizmaster of all. And Jeff said at one point that that article actually hurt his career. So even that had that kind of reputation, as all the Chuck Barris shows did. Um,
Right, but I don't. And I get what they're saying, but I don't understand how that is any different from Monty Hall stretching things out, because Monty Hall did that plenty of times. I mean,
He did
only
that
the
too, but
sketch, only like the sketch would be, we already know you got a zonk, so we might as
yeah,
well have fun with
I
it
th-
rather
I
than
think the difference
delaying.
was I think the difference was that it was an element of let's make a deal, but they didn't focus on that. Treasure Hunt was all about the fact that they were twisting the knife. That
Yes,
was
that is
they
true.
were openly wallowing in it.
That is true. Now I'm wondering how, like, my what is acceptable censor. Like, it really needs to be recalibrated where I'm like, I don't remember Treasure Hunt being that bad. Well, there are
Yeah,
worse things.
yeah, um, yeah. So again, there's definitely a discussion to be had about how these shows have aged. You said aged badly, and there's validity to it. It's one of those shows where you definitely have to understand it's a product of its time to really enjoy it.
Yes. And
So
then,
you would want to give a first timer a heads up about what they're about to see.
yes,
Um, but I still enjoy them. I
I
still
do
do enjoy the
too.
shows. Yeah,
And it's one of, and it, you're a historian also, where it's like, I can love things and know that they are completely out of place in the present time.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
And I mean,
and that's basically every Chuck Barris show.
yeah,
But they're
yeah,
all fascinating. Even a $1.98 beauty show
yeah.
with
Um,
Rip Taylor and his confetti and his toupee.
Yeah, and even the $1.98 beauty show, I'm not sure how hard Chuck Barris wanted to send a message with it, but I think you could make a case that the point of the $1.98 beauty show is it's sort of shining a light on the Miss America pageant and saying, is our ridiculous parody slash farce that much different from the actual Miss America pageant? Not
Right.
to get too philosophical, but it would be interesting to sit down and watch an episode of $1.98 and watch an actual beauty pageant side by side and ask yourself, is this really that different from the genuine article?
Probably not. That would be fascinating.
Yeah. And it just now crossed my mind. I've never thought to do that, but now maybe I should.
Yes. If you don't, I will. uh, that just complete. It's we're just both like, that was a good idea. Where do we go from there? We've covered the Gong Show. In the book, you talk about Chuck's early years and how he was basically trying to impress his wife's parents, and they
Yeah.
just were like, we're having none of it.
Yeah, Chuck married above his station in life. He married the daughter of one of the co-founders of CBS, and they did not have a high opinion of Chuck. Chuck at the time was working in like a shirt factory,
I
and
don't
it
think
was
their
just very,
opinion
very
got
clear.
any higher, though.
Yeah, it was just very clear that they didn't respect him. So Chuck decided to go into the TV business just to try to get his in-laws to like him. And Chuck
That's as
ended up
good a
climbing the
reason as
ladder
any.
pretty well. He started off as a page at NBC, which at the time was a pretty famous entry level position because so
Yes.
many NBC pages in that era went on to do big things. And Chuck went through a management training program and ended up becoming the vice president of daytime programming for ABC in a matter of just a few years. And then left ABC to become an independent producer of game shows. Um, and in all that time, you're right. Chuck never really gained his in-laws' approval, and his marriage kind of fell apart. He just kind of left the family one day because he was so exasperated by the neighbors who would come over to visit during the weekend. Um, and he moved into a seedy apartment downtown in Los Angeles, where most of the other tenants were prostitutes, and he was much much happier living in this crappy apartment building than he was living in this big beautiful house uh, with with his wife and with his family. It's
I don't know him, but
different.
that checks out.
It's a different stroke. It's a different strokes for different folks thing. It's
Yes.
what you're told is the right way to live is not necessarily the way that works out best for you. And Chuck figured out very very quickly that he was not to live in. He was not meant to live in the suburbs.
No, this no. And that's the marriage where is that the wife he had Della with?
Yes. Yeah. That marriage fell apart quickly, and Della. A few of the people that knew Chuck and Della said they didn't think Della completely recovered from her parents' divorce. And Chuck certainly had problems dealing with her in future years. Chuck wrote a heartbreaking book called Della. I used it for my own research, but I would recommend this for anybody with the caveat that you need to know what you're getting into because the book really, really is devastating, and it's Chuck coming to grips with the fact that he was a failed father. And Chuck acknowledges that. He pretty much admits that he did a really, really bad job with Della and that he screwed up a lot. And he takes accountability for that and sort of deals with his own role and what he should have done and what he completely bungled it by. Basically, Chuck's approach to a lot of his daughter's problems was to throw money at her, and
That's not what you do with someone with a drug
a
problem.
material gain only accomplishes so much.
Right.
And he was trying to fill a void, and that's not really how you fill the void with somebody like her.
No.
Yeah.
Was that also why she was part of the show for a while?
It's hard to judge that. It's one of the things that the Gong Show staff noticed was that Della didn't have didn't have friends her own age. Della was only ever around Chuck's employees. So I think it was just like a normal environment, and I think Chuck just thought it would be fun to have her on the show.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you can see the bad decisions piling up here. I can't imagine
Yeah.
anyone working on the Gong Show being a well-adjusted human being if that is the environment they enjoy being in. Like, I don't blame the people who were on it and were like, "Oh, this show is,"
Yeah.
because it's one of those things where it would be cool to like be see one episode. I would not want to work here.
But the thing was, it was great talking to the employees who did put in a lot of years at Chuck Barris. You could tell they were really happy, and that was the thing. They had just reverence for Chuck as a boss. They remembered him being a fun boss. Chuck was the kind of boss who would just take everybody out to the movies on Friday, or he would take them out for hot dogs or whatever. Um, they would have water gun fights in the office. They would have jam sessions in the office.
Yeah, that wouldn't work
Everybody
these
just had fun.
days.
Yeah, and Chuck even said that. Chuck was talking to one of his ex-employees, Vince Longo, who was the staff photographer. Years after the fact, they had a conversation, and Chuck remembered Vince remembered Chuck saying at one point in the conversation, "You know, I couldn't run that company today the way that I ran it back then." And he said the thing was Chuck was right. He says the entertainment business has been taken over by accountants,
Yes.
and a lot of the reason that you were willing to put in a 12-hour workday for Chuck was because Chuck made it fun to work for 12 hours a day. You enjoyed working 12 hours for Chuck. And an
Hi,
accountant
Olive.
now would strip away all. That's the famous Olive, yeah. But yeah, accountants now would strip out everything that Chuck did to make it a fun experience and to make people want to put in those long days. And it's kind of too bad.
That was
The
way more
television business
eloquent
isn't better for that. Yeah.
than what I was going for. I was just thinking you can't have water gun fights because everyone would be like, "Oh no, my computer, my phone." But yes, because it's all about money now. So
Yeah.
we're even seeing that simple things like bringing bagels in for breakfast have gone by
Yeah.
the wayside. You're lucky
Yeah.
if you get a bonus for the holidays.
Yeah. Mm. But yeah, everybody loved working for him. That's as much as I can say it, and that's I can say it over and over again, and it's going to sound redundant, but that's the thing that I have to hammer home when you talk about the people that worked for him, was they all loved that job.
I guess it's also different if you're behind the scenes than if you are in front of the camera and your face is associated with this.
Oh yeah, yeah,
But
and they even that was another thing that the employees noted was they could see the difference in Chuck. They could see how fame changed him. Um, and a lot of the times that people take that to mean he became a snob, he became withdrawn, he became. But really, I think his employees saw more stress than anything. Fame kind of stressed him out, and I think that concerned them.
I think fame would stress anyone out unless you love that amount of attention. And I don't think there are many people who do.
Yeah. Hmm. It's Yeah, but I was glad that I got to know Chuck's employees while I was working on this because it did give me an appreciation for what all of them did, and it gave me an appreciation for
Yes.
what Chuck did. Chuck was this incredible boss. One of Chuck's signatures on the show was he kept writing these little comedy skits to get his employees on camera, and it
Gene
seemed like
Gene.
that was what he was doing in his office all the time. Was he was just coming up with ways to put his employees in front of the camera and showcase them. And I think it was this unique little way from Chuck to show his employees that he loved them and he appreciated what they did. Um, Chuck was not close to his own family, and the staff was really Chuck's family. And I think, even though that sounds unhealthy, I think Chuck wanted to do something to show how much he appreciated what they were in his life, and he used the Gong Show for that.
And you mentioned people part the first one that comes to mind is Gene Gene the Dancing Machine. I know there were others and I'm blanking out on
Yeah.
them. I just remember Gene
There
Gene
was Gene Gene the
because
Dancing Machine. There was Father Ed, who was the
yes.
head carpenter for the show at NBC. There were Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara, who were actually the wardrobe and makeup people for the show. Um, some of the people that I talked to were Peter Leese. I mentioned Vince Longo earlier. Um, just Mike and Ellen Metzger, who were two staffers of Chuck Barris Productions.
Hmm.
But Chuck would just come up with little bits to get everybody in front of the camera. And eventually, pretty much everybody who worked for that man was on the Gong Show stage for something.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
He excuse me. I also remember the stage, the messages on the board behind the stage because he hated. I know there the infamous Lynn Bolin one, and there were a bunch of others
Yeah.
where he used that to make a point.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the big sign on stage, which was, sometimes it would just say a generic thing like yippee or something like that, but there was a day when it said Sourpuss Swirtlow, which was kind of Chuck's middle finger to a TV critic who had given the show a bad review. And Chuck had sat down for an interview with the guy and it hadn't gone well. So, yeah, they just had this insult to the TV critic on stage. Um, yeah, they also
This is
had,
also the man who ended the show with take a performance of "Take This Job and Shove It." So there's
yeah,
that.
yeah. Chuck ended the series by giving the camera the finger and singing that song. Um, yeah, Chuck kind of was not afraid to use the show as a platform for what he thought of certain people. Anita Bryant got two shows dedicated in her honor, and it featured gay and transgender contestants, which
Wow.
was pretty funny. Yeah. Um, that was Chuck used the show. That was as much as Chuck used the show as a platform.
Yeah.
Other than that, um, there wasn't much of a message or a statement to be made by the Gong Show, but he actually did do that much, which I think is pretty cool.
Is very cool. You can
Yeah.
only push so many boundaries, and he was pushing enough of them with the NBC censors.
Hmm.
I mentioned the Popsicle Twins because that's the most famous since that actually did get on the air, even though it wasn't supposed to. It was one of those acts was supposed to be so extreme that it would
Yeah.
never get on the air, and NBC did not realize what was going on with two high school students licking popsicles suggestively. And
Yeah.
it's very apparent if you watch this for 5 seconds what is going on.
Yeah, yeah, the Popsicle Twins were an act that Chuck had booked for the show as a decoy because of a weird
Yeah.
quirk that Chuck had noticed. The NBC censors had to screen every act during the rehearsals and filter out any of the ones that he found unacceptable. And so Chuck's
Yeah.
strategy of dealing with the censors was he would bring on one act that auditioned for the show that was just completely unacceptable, that he knew could not get on the show. And that way, Chuck could
So the
also book
topless
a
go-go
borderline act
dancer.
that he wasn't sure about. Yeah. And that way, the censors would have flagged the one that was obviously bad, but the borderline one that Chuck wasn't sure about would make it on the show. Well, for whatever reason, the NBC censors didn't flag the Popsicle Twins. So Chuck sent them on there with no thought, and then went ahead and left the act in the final cut. And the NBC stations on the East Coast are looking at it and going, "What the hell are we airing?" And this telephone game emerges where they're starting to call the NBC stations and other time zones and giving them warnings. Listen, you guys can't air the Gong Show today. Air a rerun or something in its place, um, because it's kind of this mystery of how the hell did this thing get on the air. And even Chuck admits, I'm not really sure why that aired, because again, he had it there as a decoy, and for some reason the decoy made it on the air.
And we may not still be talking about the show if that wasn't one of the moments where it's like, what were they thinking? Because there's so much of the Gong Show where you're like, oh, it's just normal craziness. And then this, it's like, oh, they were intentionally pushing the buttons and then got away with it because NBC didn't realize that was pushing the buttons.
Right.
All the buttons were already down and it got through.
Yeah.
Are there any other acts that you know about that didn't make it onto the Gong Show, but staff members are like, oh yeah, this was completely outrageous?
Um, no, nobody really remembered an act that they loved but couldn't book it. There were certainly acts that, and we actually do have footage of this because documentary footage was shot in 1979. So we actually have some footage of Chuck going up to acts and saying, "Listen, we'd love to air your act, but." And one bit of footage is it's Chuck having to explain to a guy who just sang about how much he loves hookers and cocaine. He said, "Okay, uh, we need you to change this lyric, and this lyric before we can put it on the air." Um, so we at least we have the film evidence of that. But there was nothing that stood out to the show's staff as, boy, there was this one act that we had to say no to. What tended to happen a lot was reporters who were writing stories about the show would make note of the acts that were sent away. Uh, there was one who brought a live snake with her, and she was told to leave the snake in the car because the snake just terrified the staff. Um, but yeah, what stood out to Chuck's staff, the folks that conducted the auditions, was they remembered Weird Al Yankovic auditioned for the show and they said no to him. And after all these years, they all remembered that, but they remembered this one funny singer that they said no to, who went on to become a big star. But there were no other real acts that stood out there in their memory banks.
It's so weird to think about Weird Al on the Gong Show. I feel like it's better that he got rejected from the Gong Show than it would be had he appeared on it.
Yeah,
It makes a better story.
it does. And we even know the name of the song. The song that he sang for his audition was "Mr. Frump and the Iron Lung." And you can find that. He actually did like officially record that down the road, but that was the song that he sang for his audition.
Okay, I'm gonna have to dig that one up because I don't know what Weird Al would have to say about an iron lung, but I'm in for a journey apparently. What was it? Oh, and then after the Gong Show, you probably have seen at least part of it, the Gong Show movie.
Yeah. Yeah, the Gong
which
Show movie, which
is a
changed
thing.
shape a few times in development. I mentioned the documentary footage that was shot of the auditions, and that was for Plan A. When they decided they were going to do a Gong Show movie, it was originally just going to be a documentary directed by Robert Downey Sr. And Chuck immediately fell out with Robert Downey Sr. They didn't get along at all, and the recollection of everybody who was there was, even though when you watch the movie it says directed by
Mhm.
Robert Downey, the recollection was Chuck pretty much just sent him home and took over the movie himself after that. So they started out just doing a documentary.
Mhm.
Chuck had his falling out with Robert Downey. They still had the footage, and then at one point the idea became it was just going to be a bunch of strung together acts that couldn't be aired on the show. It would be the acts that were too vulgar, or the acts that were offensive, or the acts they had to bleep. They were going to string together a bunch of that footage. And then they went in another direction. So the final product is
A mess.
it's a mess because it's the plan A idea, the plan B idea, and the plan C idea. If you watch the final product has some of that documentary footage, and it has some of the acts that had to get censored for the
Yes.
show, and then the rest of the movie is this fictionalized story with Chuck as himself, with his girlfriend as the supporting character, and it's this story of Chuck having a mental breakdown while hosting the Gong Show, and
Yes.
going away to like Tunisia to get away from all the stress that he's experiencing. And eventually, all of Chuck's friends and the Gong Show staff and the celebrity judges march into the desert and sing a show stopping musical number to convince him to come back. And that's, as odd as that sounds, that's the movie in the finished product. And Phil Hartman also has a very, very bit part in the movie as an airport terrorist. Um,
That
uh,
aged great.
yeah, so it's a strange movie and not a good movie.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
I don't know where my copy went. I remember watching half of it in college and stopping midway through because I'm like, this is weird and really depressing. It's Chuck Barris having an existential breakdown.
yeah, yeah. It's a strange choice for a movie, and J.P. Morgan, even who is in it, said the finished product was a piece of crap, and she kind of zeroed in on this. Nobody wants to hear a millionaire complaining about his problems,
No.
and that's correct.
Yeah, it's not even done tongue in cheek. It's just no,
Yeah,
like you need help. Like Chuck, like get a therapist. You need help.
yeah,
Is the takeaway from that movie.
yeah, uh, yeah. I cannot really. It might be good for morbid curiosity viewing, but I can't recommend it.
I can't recommend it either. I'm not even sure Morbid Curiosity can save it. Maybe if you just go to the point with the rejected Gong
Yeah.
Show acts,
Hmm.
then it's worth watching. But if no, you don't want to watch Chuck just walk around looking sad and trying to
Yeah.
figure out what to do.
Yeah. Mm.
And we've talked about a lot of different things. Is there anything specifically you would like to mention about the Gong Show or Chuck Barris in general?
I'd like to think that I've had some effect on the Sony video library because of this book, because all of a sudden they're posting episodes of The Gong Show from their archives on YouTube.
Oh wow.
So, yeah, if you go to the YouTube channel Classic TV Rewind, which is owned by Sony, you'll see episodes of The Gong Show pop up every now and then. I would sincerely like to think that I've created some sort of buzz for the show as a result of this book. But yes, if you enjoy reading the book, by all means, support what Sony is doing and go to YouTube and watch these videos that they're uploading.
I had no idea that that was owned by Sony. I just thought it
Hmm.
was someone super into just bootlegging old game shows. Like there
Nope.
are whole
No,
channels
that is.
dedicated
Uh,
to just
oh yeah,
bootleg. game shows and
No, Classic
this is
TV
legit.
Rewind is a Sony property, and so they've been dusting stuff off from the vaults. And so for all the people who are wondering where the Gong Show reruns are, that's the channel to check out and keep up the traffic on those Gong Show reruns.
And we may get more of them.
Yeah, but
Eh,
that's about it for me.
I have a question for you because I
Yeah.
remember watching all the Chuck Barris library shows during GSN's dark age when they lost the Mark Goodson Bill Todman library,
hmm
with the exception of, was it one season of Family Feud and some seasons of
It was
Match
something
Game?
like that. They could keep airing, yeah, they could keep airing the very recent season of Family Feud at that time and a season of The Price is Right, I think.
And that was when a few of the fur episodes got through that shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But that was the only time I remember seeing The Gong Show without having to specifically seek it out on the internet somewhere.
Yeah.
Was it rerun anywhere else, or it was just Game Show Network's like, we don't have the good stuff, so
No,
let's show the.
um, the rerun history here is Chuck Barris sold a package of reruns into syndication,
Okay.
which is how Paul Rubens got a windfall check. And Paul Rubens told that story a few times. Was Chuck encouraged his contestants, if they were not already members of SAG or AFTRA, to become members. And he paid royalties to the contestants who were. So Chuck Barris was sending out royalty checks to the contestants, which is very unusual for game
Yeah.
shows. But yeah, Paul Rubens made a nice chunk of money off reruns from the Gong Show because he was a contestant on 14 episodes.
Wow.
So reruns ran in syndication for a while. Then USA Network picked them up. I think they were actually the first or one of the first game shows that USA aired when they started rerunning game shows, and they had so much success doing that
So this would be
through the
in the
80s and 90s.
80s when they were
Yeah.
also doing Press Your Luck.
hmm
Okay, so this would
And
be before
then
my time, and I would not have known this,
yeah,
or I would not
and
have
then
watched this.
and then Game Show Network picked them up when they launched that channel, and
Hmm.
then over time, what has since happened, and the reason that the stuff resurfacing on Sony has gotten my attention. What happened was the music licensing rights for the Gong Show expired. You have to license the music that the band plays. You have to license the songs that the
Yeah.
contestants sing, and over time that those rights expired, which meant that rerunning the Gong Show would require forking over some extra money uh, to cover that stuff. So the fact that Sony is sharing these episodes now is kind of attention getting. And makes me pretty happy because there was a time when I would have said you're probably not going to see Gong Show reruns again, and happily Sony is making a liar out of me, and I love to be proven wrong in situations like this.
Kind of like the Batman TV series, the 1960s with Adam West and Burt Ward, where we're initially like, this will never happen because I have to license all the appearances, and then it's been on DVD for like a decade now because someone went through and managed to get that
Yeah.
cleared, which I don't know how. Great for them, and it's nice to be able to go watch that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's great to be able to revisit stuff, and I hope these big corporations realize that we do appreciate it when they make the effort.
Yes, we do. Otherwise, you have to hope the Paley Center, either in New York or LA, has it, or someone recorded it off the internet, not off the internet,
Yeah.
but recorded it when it aired and posted it on the internet, which is a lot of work.
Yeah. Quite a bit.
I think that's all I have for now. There's so much going on with Chuck, but it's also hard to define anything about Chuck, even when you understand some things about him, because like texted you, he was just a weird dude. Like, I don't
Oh yeah.
really know what's going on here. He was just weird.
Yeah, and there was more to him than that, and so I was glad to chronicle that story and try to make that clear.
Right, and I'm still going through that, and I think part of he comes off as weird is because he wasn't comfortable on the Gong Show, and the entire humor of the Gong Show was no one here should be doing what they are currently doing.
Yeah, it's very true.
This is probably why Chuck ended up hosting it instead of Gary Owens, I believe. He was the
It was
nighttime.
Gary Owens. Gary Owens hosted it for one season of the nighttime show, and the original plan was for him to host the daytime show. NBC didn't like his style of hosting, and if you watch the nighttime show hosted by Gary Owens, you can kind of see why. Because there's something just off about it. Once you've seen the Gong Show hosted by Chuck Barris, no other host feels right, and so it's hard to zero in on anything about Gary's performance that's wrong. But you just watch the nighttime show hosted by Gary Owens, and you just think this isn't the Gong Show. It's a little like it's like a sci-fi movie where somebody has returned from time traveling and they've altered the present in little ways that are imperceptible. Um, it's the Gong Show, but boy, for some reason, it doesn't feel like the Gong Show.
I haven't seen any more than a 2-minute clip of that,
Yeah.
but I'm guessing that
Now,
was due to the fact that Chuck was off in the same way that the Gong Show was off.
I mean, Chuck never sold the Gary Owens shows into the rerun package. The reruns when USA was airing them when they were airing in syndication were just the Chuck Barris episodes. So once Gary was let go, he kind of disappeared from Gong Show history.
Yes.
I was lucky to be able to screen some episodes for book review purposes, and it really, yeah, like I said, it's just strange. It doesn't feel right.
I mean, nothing about the Gong Show feels right, but it has to feel right for the Gong Show.
Yeah,
And thank you again, Adam. I appreciate it when you come on.
sure
Are
thing.
there any other books in the works right now, or
Right now, I've got one called the Game Show Scrapbook, which is more of a photo album than an actual deep dive into anything, and so I'm looking forward to getting that out there. It's going to be my first book in living color, so
ooh?
I'm looking forward to getting that in the Game Show fans' hands. So keep an eye out for that in the next few
So
months.
this is not going to be a cheap book if it has to be printed in color.
Probably not, so stash your pennies.
Will do.
Yep.
So thank you again, Adam.
Thank you.
And this has been Greetings from the Idiot Box. I'm Allison Lips. And until next time, remember that television is a medium neither rare nor well done. Bye.